Okay, so now we're going to start actually painting our model. One of the things that I like to do is take Post-its like this, and if you can see, I write down the actual paints that I'm using for that model so that when I go on to another model, especially of that same model type, I remember what the colors are and I don't get mixed up. Um, if I can show you a picture of my wall, there's just papers all over the place with the colors I'm using for whatever models that I'm painting. So the first thing on this Bound Dead Zombie model, I'm going to paint the cloth, his robes, the tattered robes, and for that, I use contrast Ianden yellow. And again, use whatever you like. So shake it up. Really make sure you shake it up well. Something I didn't tell you in the last video is that you can also grab this technical contrast medium. That's something you can use to thin out that contrast paint if you want. Don't use water because there's already water added in there to make it a contrast paint. So technical contrast medium. You don't have to use it, but as you start painting more and more, you might find that you want to thin paint out so that it goes on differently um, as you start to learn more and more techniques and such. So I'm using a small detail brush. I could have to use the highlight brush also if I wanted to. So you always want to wet your brush first, get it in that water, and I'll usually do something like that just to get the excess water out and just dip. Try not to go too far over where the brush meets the metal. If you do, it's not terrible, but always remember to clean that stuff off when you're done using your brush, or it ends up kind of clotting over there and can mess up your brush. So very simply, start painting on those lines of material. Go slow until you kind of get a firm handle on how you handle a paintbrush. Sometimes I'll use my finger to rest on one part of the model while I run this across because it helps to steady the brush. So hopefully you can see that. Yeah, you can see that yellow on there. So that's that contrast yellow, and that's the top piece of cloth. I'm going to paint the rest of that cloth. So I'll pause the video and then we'll get back to it and you can see how much further we're getting. So we've done all the cloth and you can see there the yellow on both sides. Then we're going to give that just a minute to dry up somewhat. And then we're going to move on to doing the flesh. So when you're doing, let's say like 5 of these Bound Dead models, what you can do is you just line them up. It's exactly what I do. And you do the cloth on the one model, then you can move on to the second model. By the time you get through the 5th model, that first model is dry enough for you to start using a different paint, a different color. So again, we're now going to get to the flesh. For the Bound Dead, I used a flesh tone called Skeleton Horde. That's contrast Skeleton Horde. Now again, if I was doing conventional painting, I would have to paint these the regular paints on, and then have to do 3 more types of layers, which would be a wash, uh, a highlight, and a dry brushing. Dry brushing before highlights, most likely. That's traditional, but the contrast paints will allow you to do all that in just the one step, and it takes a lot less time. And frankly, it just looks great. It really does. So again, I'm using this medium brush. I'm going to dip and just going to right off the bat start doing the skin. Now the thing is with certain models, I'll do part of the skin in just this skeleton horde and use red to highlight the areas that look like they might be bleeding. I know, gross. Or, entrails coming out. But, you know, that all goes to the realism of the model. So I'll show you what this looks like. And then again, we'll pause. I'll continue with the model. So you can look. You see the arm on this side over here is not yet painted. So you can see the difference between the painted arm and the unpainted arm. And then you can see his face. It started to paint and how the contrast gets into like the eye socket. So it gives you that depth, that shading. So I'm going to paint the rest of his flesh and the rest of the model, in fact, and then come back and show you what the contrast paints have done in the next video. So that's the flesh tone, the robes with the contrast paint. Again, any questions, email me, Eric at Mythico Studios.